The way we buy and sell homes has made some of the biggest shifts that we've seen in years. And if you're not paying attention, it could literally cost you thousands of dollars. So whether you're a seller trying to get top dollar for your home or you're a buyer trying to save every last dime, these changes could completely alter your strategy. So stick around. I'm going to go through the good, the bad, and how it affects your next move in real estate. Let's dive in. So looking at it overall, things haven't changed that much. These sellers still want to get top dollar for their home. They still want to get multiple buyers competing for their home so that they can drive up the price. And then ultimately, they want to put the most money that they can in their pocket. Now, buyers, on the other hand, they want to do pretty much the opposite. They want to get the best deal that they can. They want to make sure that the home that they purchase is in good condition and doesn't have any major problems. And then ultimately, they want to make sure that they save as much money as possible. So the biggest changes have to do with how commissions are handled. And so in years gone by, customarily, the seller always paid the buyer's agent's commission, and that commission amount was negotiated by the listing agent and the seller before the home ever went on the market. And then once it did go on the market, the buyer's agent's commission was published on the multiple listing service. Now the party paying the buyer's agent's compensation, that line's been blurred. The buyer's agent can no longer go to the multiple listing service and see how much the seller's willing to pay, if anything. So this has become a point of negotiation rather than a surety by the published amount in the multiple listing service. So most sellers will like this particular change because they're not having to make a decision about compensation before they see the buyer's offer. Now they might decide not to pay a compensation at all, but at least in this case, they get to see the buyer's offer before they make a decision whether or not they're going to make any compensation. Okay, so let's use an example from the past first. So we'll use round numbers to make it really easy. So say the sale price on a home was $1 million and the buyer's agent talked to their buyer about it and they wanted to go ahead and make an offer. Now it said in the multiple listing service that the buyer's agent was going to receive a 3% compensation. And so they accepted the deal and the buyer's agent was paid $30,000 and the seller netted $970,000 in their pocket at the end of the day, and it was done. Now fast forward to today, let's use that same home as an example. The buyers asked their buyer's agent to write an offer on that home for $1 million. But now in this case, they go ahead and ask the seller, or ask their buyer's agent to ask the seller if the seller will go ahead and pay that person's compensation. So $1 million offer, they're asking the seller to pay a 3% commission to the buyer's agent, and then the seller would net that same $970,000. Now, if the seller accepts, everything's hunky-dory, and they go into escrow, and the deal gets done. But what happens if the seller now says, hey, Mr. Buyer, or hey, Mrs. Buyer, or hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I accept your offer. However, with regard to the commission, you're going to have to pay the commission because I'm not going to pay it. So at that point, the buyer has a couple of different options, obviously. They can go ahead and comply with that and pay their agent on their own. They could also say, well, I'm not going to do that and I'm going to keep on shopping and move on. Or as a third option, they might decide that, okay, so I'm not going to pay $1 million for your home. I'll pay you $970,000 for your home, and then I'll pay my agent $30,000 commission, and we'll run it that way. So as you can see, the commission now just becomes a point of negotiation, and the parties get to decide who pays what, rather than it being set forth prior to this whole negotiation. It's now set forth as part of the negotiation of the purchase. And so each one of the parties really just needs to take a look at their bottom line, decide what's best for them, and then negotiate from that standpoint. So now, to complicate things just a little bit more, buyer's agents can no longer just meet somebody at a property for the first time and show it to them. They have to have first entered into an agreement regarding their compensation before they can ever step foot on a property with a potential buyer. And so this is a huge departure from what it was before. I mean, it used to be a lot of agents would actually meet clients for the first time at a property. Now, this wasn't a recommended practice, but people did that quite often. And so now they actually have to enter into that agreement. So from a seller's perspective, that's not a big deal, right? Except that it is a good deal for them in that the buyer's agent isn't meeting their clients for the first time on their doorstep, right? So they're supposed to have a relationship established prior to them showing a home. And actually it should have been that way always, but in practice, a lot of times it wasn't. So, and now they have to have that relationship. And so hopefully that agent has also got a pre-approval letter, has got proof of funds, and knows that they're dealing with a qualified buyer and hasn't inconvenienced the seller through them getting ready for a showing and doing all the things that they needed to keep their house clean. And then somebody shows up at the door that's not actually even qualified. And so it eliminates that practice, which obviously is a good thing for sellers. The second thing that you need to understand, which that a seller really needs to understand, is that the buyer's agent and the buyer have entered into an agreement about what that compensation is. And for example, let's say it's 2%. So when the buyer goes to make an offer, he cannot now ask the seller to pay a higher percentage than he was willing to pay, or he or she was willing to pay, right? So they can't say, oh, you need to pay my agent 3%, but I was only willing to pay him 2%. So that can't happen. The seller is only obligated, or well, he's not obligated to pay a commission at all, but he cannot pay more than was previously negotiated between the buyer's agent and the buyer, which is a great thing if you're a seller. Okay, so from a buyer's perspective, this is kind of a big deal, and it's important to understand the ramifications of it, because the buyer's agent is going to ask you to sign something like this, which is a buyer's representation and broker's compensation agreement. And this has some financial ramifications in it for a buyer, and they need to understand that prior to actually entering into the agreement. And I say this because you don't want to end up paying compensation to multiple agents. You don't want to end up paying more compensation or not understanding this completely. So I've made another video that details what to look for in one of these agreements, and I really would advise you to take a look and study it for yourself. Hey, thanks for joining me today. I hope I was helpful in answering some of your questions. If you have more questions, please don't hesitate to post them below. Love it if you would give us a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content. Thanks very much. Hope you have a wonderful day.